Hello, and welcome back to Project Imminent Death. I'm your host, once again, Sadamir, and today we have for you two stories from a very close friend of mine. We hope you enjoy. Let me start this off by saying I'm no stranger to the outdoors, and I've never been a person who saw things that weren't there. I was 18 and fresh out of high school at this time. I was living in southern Ohio, about 30 miles east of Cincinnati. I was working at a glass factory at the time, and I would usually want to spend my time off either gaming or doing commando things. It was the beginning of summer. I used to fish a lot, and I mean a lot. This particular evening, I decided I wanted to go catfishing at my friend's property. He owns about 100 acres, with about 70 being woods and the other 30 being a horse pasture with a large pond. I called him up and made sure it was okay for me to be there. After getting the okay, I began loading my things into my truck. I grabbed two of my catfish poles, my tackle box, a Glock 19 I was borrowing from my dad because a commando was never lacking, my Bluetooth speaker so I could listen to metal, and my pupper. I loaded up in my truck and headed to the local store to buy some chicken livers bait, some monsters as well. I arrived at my friend's property after about 45 minutes of driving country roads. I pulled into the driveway and nobody was home. I pulled around to the gate at the end of the dirt path and led into the pasture. I arrived at the pond at around sunset. I backed the truck up and opened the door to let my doggo out. He shot out the door like a bullet. I paid no mind and let him go off to do his dog stuff while I set up my poles and turned on some metal. I went to the back of the truck and noticed that none of the horses were around, which seemed weird to me, but I paid no mind to it. It was also dead silent aside from the sound of my dog running around in the tall grass and loudly sniffing everywhere. I also ignored that. It was dark by now, and I had just finished setting up. Before casting out, I decided to return to the cab of my truck to grab a can of Monster and a cigarette. As I was looking for my cigarettes, my dog shot past me and jumped into the cab of my truck. He seemed terrified. I wondered what he was so scared of. It was then that I realized that it was still dead silent. It was then that I also realized that I could smell something terrible. It smelled like a rotting corpse with a hint of burned wires. Now, I've spent a lot of time on 4chan and listening to creepypastas and other spooky stories, so I had a hunch on what the smell was. I slowly started to turn around to see if I could spot anything. I turned around towards the light pole and dock on the opposite side of the pond and could see a silhouette. I couldn't quite make out what it was, just that it was the shape of a person, but taller. It was moving toward the light. I started to panic. I got a clear look of it when it stepped into the light. It was almost as tall as the light post, thin and lanky. It had long arms that went down past its knees, ending in claws. It had the legs of a deer with a human torso, and the head of a deer with huge, scraggly antlers. It was drooling a ridiculous amount, and I could hear its raspy breathing. I felt it staring right at me. I grabbed the Glock off the seat and jumped back into the truck. I turned the keys and rolled the window down, pointed the gun into the thing's direction and mag dumped. I heard it made an ungodly scream and saw it running towards me. I threw the truck in drive and floored it. When I looked in the mirror, nothing was there. Then I felt the back of my truck tip down, like something heavy had been dropped in. The dog started snarling and growling. Then I heard the same scream coming from right behind me. I froze, unsure of what to do, as I was without a lot of ammo. I just kept driving. Before I knew it, I was at the gate. I was still shook, so I didn't get out of the truck until I saw my buddy pull into the driveway. I got out and told him what happened, and he told me he had seen it before too, and that it had killed one of his horses. I haven't been back since. I'll preface this by saying that my friends and I have lived in the same area basically our whole lives. We're closer than family and have had each other's backs for over 10 years at this point. My friend, who we'll call Tom, lives about 5 minutes down the road from me. My other friend, who we'll call Josh, is literally his next door neighbor. We're all big into guns. Myself being a former commando, but my two friends are just normie threepers, but still great guys. We would often spend hours shooting together while making fun of the local junkie population and local hicks. All of us are believers in the paranormal as well, but not schizo or anything like that. This whole story started about a month ago. Tom lives in front of a large plot of land used for farming corn and soybeans, which is bordered by a massive forest that likely stretches all the way to the southern border of the state. One day we were just hanging out, and he mentions that he had been hearing weird noises around the house at night. Noises like small thumps against walls and scratches, but we all wrote it off as raccoons, deer, maybe coyotes. We made a trip to a local sporting goods store that day to get some ammo as we were planning on doing some shooting. Tom ended up buying a trail camera to put outside his house so he could see what was making the noises. Sure enough, the The only pictures he managed to get were those of deer and raccoons, until the camera disappeared and none of us could find it. Things started getting progressively worse. He told me that it went from soft thuds and scratches to sounds of a banshee screaming in the woods, and that he could hear clear footsteps outside. This became a nightly occurrence. Things reached their peak 1 week ago when one of his dogs was killed. A female Rottweiler who was less than a year old. Her neck was snapped, so it very well could have been a person, but at this point we were all starting to really wake up to the situation. Tom was being stalked. After he spent a couple days mourning over the death of his dog, Tom decided he wanted to do something about this. He asked Josh and I if we would be willing to stake out the property in his shack. We loaded up on ammo and other essentials and met at Tom's house. He had been staying at Josh's house the past few days and said he could still hear the screeches. We were armed to the teeth. I had my CZ Scorpion and Glock 19. Josh had a 1911 and a Bubba lever-action 30-30, and Tom had a DPMS AR and a Beretta, as well as a Mossberg 500. To shorten it, the night was uneventful. We didn't hear or see anything despite being on edge the whole time. We called it at around 4:30 in the morning. About 20 minutes after I had gotten back home, I get a frantic call from Tom. He said that shortly after we left, his AC was shoved through his window. He described hearing an inhuman-sounding laugh outside, along with heavy footsteps sprinting towards the woods. We decided to stake out again the next night, which was last night. We decided to up the security and have 2 people patrolling the property at all times and 1 person keeping watch from the house. We also built a massive fire in the back of the property, and Josh had brought his 2 trained German Shepherds. We arrived at about 8 p.m., an hour or so before sundown. I had picked up a couple extra boxes of 9mm and was loading my spare magazine from my Glock on the front porch. I was sitting there, thinking about how utterly ridiculous this was and how I was starting to feel like I was in some trash creepypasta when the cows in the pasture across the street started making a lot of noise. It's not out of the ordinary for cows to make a lot of noise, but this was as if they were getting agitated or scared. I shifted my attention away from my bovine bros when the front door opened and Josh walked out. He informed me that me and him would be taking the first 2-hour shift outside, and I was to stand by the fire for a while and alternate patrols with him. Fast forward to about 10 p.m. It's pitch black outside. The only lights are the light from the fire and lights from the house. I'm standing in front of the fire and hitting my vape, don't judge, when I hear the sound of a 30-30 ringing out, then another, and another. I rushed over to where the shots came from, out of breath by the time I got there, and saw Josh was as white as paper. He said he saw something in the field moving in our direction on all 4s. He said it looked like a big coyote, but it was rotting. He also said the eyes were glowing yellow. He shot 3 times and it was gone. I sat with him while he smoked a cigarette to calm down. Tom opened a window and we filled him in on what happened. While we were talking, I heard both of the dogs start barking and growling very aggressively. Josh and I hauled over that way, but the dogs were gone. They must have taken off into the woods after the thing. We didn't give chase, and about 5 minutes later, we heard both dogs yelp from far off into the woods. Things then quieted down for about an hour. We changed shifts. I went inside the house and Tom went outside. I walked into the kitchen and retrieved a can of Monster from the fridge and began to consume my sip. I was startled by the sound of Josh's 30-30 and Tom's AR firing rapidly and in unison. I unslung my Scorpion and ran towards the window and saw them both shooting towards the field. I opened it up and asked what happened, and they told me that they had heard the same inhuman laugh that Tom described with the sound of grass rustling, as if something was moving towards them. They said it sounded like it got close, and they started shooting, hoping to chase whatever it was off. I suggested we wait inside the house for sunrise, and they agreed without hesitation. We crammed inside this tiny house. We kept hearing laughing and screaming outside, sometimes coming from literally right outside, sometimes sounding far off. I had never gripped my rifle so tightly in my life. I prayed to the God Emperor to let us survive. It was around 3:15 in the morning at this point, and things became eerily silent. I was hoping the thing lost interest, but the eternal black pill hit, and I knew that that wasn't the case. At about 3:30, we heard an inhuman scream from right outside the back door. Not like the screech people describe when talking about similar entities. An actual scream, followed by the sound of something slamming repeatedly into the back door. We said screw this and decided to get out of Dodge. Josh empties his 1911 into the door, and before I knew it, Tom had started firing his Beretta. Once they had stopped, I pulled my car keys out of my pockets and we slowly started towards the front door. Yeah, I know this is a dumb blonde in a horror movie moment, but it seemed like the only choice we had. We sprinted to my car, which was already unlocked, and sped down the road to Josh's house. We parked my car in his garage and locked ourselves in until we knew the sun was up. We heard the screams and screeches until close to 5 a.m. As soon as the sun was up, Tom called his landlord to tell him that he was moving out that day. He asked us to help him move all his stuff because he didn't want to spend another night in that house. When we went back to help him move, we didn't find anything until we rounded the back to where the fire was. By the remains in the fire, we found the body of one of the dogs. It had its chest ripped open, and it was disgusting. We never found the other one, and Tom moved back in with his parents further down the road. Don't know what it was. Could it have just been a junkie? Thanks again for tuning into this video. I know it was shorter than the last one, but I wanted to keep them together because these are both from the same person. Comment down below which one was your favorite. And remember, you're never alone. Not in the woods, not in your house, never. Because even if there's not a single soul around, the creature behind that rock has no soul to account for. Good night.